All right. So we're going, we're going to attempt to today to just get past chapter 1 in Genesis. No, no. I said if I got past the first sentence, I'd be very happy. I didn't.
This could be you. I wouldn't want two scriptures.
Welcome to my world. When they go, oh, Vince, let's do the parasha, right? And then they want you to cover 4 or 5 chapters in one sitting. I'm like, no, I can't. Wrong teacher. I can't. If you want to peel this thing apart and you really want to understand it, we're gonna camp. All right. So just treat this as you walk into your wilderness, and Abba says, "Sit down. We're gonna have a conversation." We might be here for a year. We might be here for a week.
How are you sure do it in 3.5 years?
Remember, their reading cycle was so. There's a difference between your reading cycle and then me coming in and kind of breaking it open for you.
And how did the disciples then understand?
They grew up with it. Remember, we're so out of culture. This is why I want you guys to get into the parasha cycle. If you start getting into that cycle and you're reading the stories, I don't want you to peel it apart. Some of you have done this before. You might see links and you might chase that down. That's fine. But what I want from you is to get the text inside you first. You see, when I come in and we say, oh, okay, parasha Behar, on the mountain, you're going to go, oh yeah, what was that again? And then we're going to start telling the story and then you're going to go, oh, it's like this. Or we're going to say, okay, well, we're entering into the portion called Kedoshim, or whatever the scenario is, we go, this is what happened in that portion. Now, if you've been doing this since you were 6 years old, and we come in and we have a discussion, and I say, well, you guys all know the portion. Let's talk about it, right? And then I'm able to go, what they would traditionally do in the times of Messiah is, okay, before you come into synagogue, right? It's okay, we've got some time today. Before you come into synagogue, in Galilee, you would mikvah outside, right? So summer, winter, it doesn't matter. You go, before you come into the place where we gather as a community, where we gather as a family, you make sure you focus on the outside cleanliness, because when you come up here, you better make sure the inside is right. When you come into synagogue and you find your seat, basically double rows running from the back to the front, the arguments about the best seats in the synagogue were generally here. Okay? There would be a seat here called the seat of Moses, right? And generally, depending on either side, whichever way is facing Jerusalem, you would have something called a Torah ark, right? Or a Torah cupboard. Basically, you can spot them, there's a niche cut out into the rock and there's no covering. So what the rabbi would do is he would go out and he would take the scroll, right? And as he would pick it up and he would bring it to a place, there would be either a platform that he would be able to put it on, and he would go to the parasha and he would start to read. The congregation's response was to stand when the king spoke. So in my 3 chapters, we would read all of them, you would be upstanding because God is speaking. Then he would roll it up, probably do a Haftarah portion, take it, put it back, and then he would come and sit. And when the rabbi sits, that means he's going to start to talk. And then we would spend the rest of the day expounding upon what you read. Ask you questions. How do you interpret that? How do you see these 2 links together? Right? Because this would be the heartbeat of the community. Well, not everybody had a Torah scroll. Not every community could afford a Torah scroll. These things were extremely costly. It's something that we would have to buy together to be able to put it up just so that we can hear the words of God. Okay? So, going through that cycle year after year, and you're being educated, as we spoke before, the discipleship process of going through Bet Sefer, which would be your primary school, dealing only with Torah, educating the children, and then maybe if you pass that level, go to Bet Midrash, and then you would deal with the prophets and the writings. Not only would you hear it every Shabbat, you grew up in that education system. So then even if you see Peter being a fisherman or so on, we call him, he wasn't really good enough to make it up to that next level to go study at Bet Midrash, and he wasn't considered good enough to be able to go up and to be trained by a rabbi to become a disciple in the first place. He became a fisherman. But the biblical understanding that these guys had compared to what most believers do is scary. They were so immersed in that culture, in that understanding, that you would be able to, well, we live our life by the Torah. It's a community thing. Now we're kind of splotted all over the place, and we're coming from it from a backward point of view. We go, oh yes, we've been told about this Yeshua, and he came and he died for our sins because we're sinners and we need salvation so that we can be reconciled back to God. And we get the Holy Spirit. I mean, let's face it, before you do a study on any of the Holy Spirit, what do you think he's there for? Generally, so you can do cool things. I have gifts of the Spirit and we can do miracles now. That's amazing, right? It's not the only reason he's there. There's many different facets of it, right? And now you go, okay, now what am I supposed to do with this? But you don't even understand the front of the book to be able to understand what's going on over there, because we're part of that picture, right? So going through a cycle like this is a process. This is not something I'm going to be able to teach you and then go, okay, now you've got it down pat 100%. Because I can guarantee you, probably, if I had to ask you exactly what we spoke about last week, you would probably give me 40% of all the points I hit. And that's really good, right? But the process that you're going to go on is every time you go through this, and every time you look at your notes, and every time you study it out, and every time you discuss it, you're going to go, oh yeah, there was that one thing. And as that kind of builds up your knowledge and you continue to solidify your foundation as you go through the books, and then it's going to compact as you go through the rest of the books. Because Torah is the framework on which the rest of the books are built. Yeah, we kind of want to nullify that, and then we can go, oh, okay, well, that part doesn't really matter. Why do we do that, by the way? Okay, but let's excuse the theology. Why do we do it?
I could say that the 90% why we sort of like do that is because we don't quite understand. And we sort of like read all these names and none of them have real meaning.
What happens if there's an instruction that I understand intellectually and I still choose to ignore it? Okay, we can point it back to stiff neck, but generally what we do is that if I don't want to be accountable to that, I ignore that. Yeah, well, we're playing golden calf. All right? I can point to instructions that Messianic or Torah observant communities ignore. No, we don't have to do that. Well, that's like who's first? And then we go, oh, hang on a second, no, we don't. Like sit in the second session when we discuss it. I know a lot of guys that go, no, we don't need to do that. I'm like, but it's an instruction, and you're going to see that. It's written down in the Torah. And then we're going to go, okay, but so, and then I think, no, it no longer applies to me. Why doesn't it apply to you? The reality is you don't want to. Right? And then we kind of go through this process of going, okay, well, if I don't want it to apply to me, therefore I don't have to do it. And there are many such instructions that I politely ignore because ultimately I don't want to be subject to something. That's why most atheists will go, well, I don't want to believe there is a God because I actually don't want to be subject to God. Most Christians build a theology around grace only because that means I can do whatever I want and then he still has to accept me. It's not a biblical foundation. The Messianics play the game in between because we take a whole bunch of Christianity, a whole bunch of New Age, and a whole bunch of some other weird things, and we bring them in, and then we go, we're a Torah observant. And we're like, yeah, maybe partly, but there's a whole bunch of extras that you're also observing, which has got no biblical foundation whatsoever. And what happens when you point that out? Yeah, generally they don't want to phone you anymore.
They block you.
Or they block you, right? But that's not why we're here. We are here to get to the biblical basis of understanding so that it is your foundations, your theology, your understanding about God and your walk is based on what the text says, not what man says. Because ultimately I'm going to stand before God one day and he's going to ask me, what did I do? Did you do this?
I'm trying.
No, you know, and that's the thing. It says, you know, obviously, first and foremost, right? You gave me new life, right? So I'm gonna talk about Yeshua. I'm going to talk about salvation. I'm going to talk about reconciliation. But when people ask me, why do I need to be reconciled? What went wrong? Where do I go? I'm going to have to go back to the fall. I'm going to have to tell them what instructions there are that still apply. I'm going to have to teach them the ways of the Father so that they also can be reconciled through Yeshua, but obedient as well through Him because He's the Word. Yeah.
Also, like, the more we know,
Yeah.
we learn, the more responsible we are, the more we don't fall, because we actually know the truth.
You're 100% correct in what you're saying, but I don't want you to see it as judged for. I want you to see, yeah, because the more you know, Vince, stop teaching. Stop telling me what to do because I don't want to know. The reality is that the more God invests in you with understanding, the expectation is more. So Yeshua would say it this way, you know, he came to a tree and it didn't bear fruit. So what would a good farmer do? He said, chop it down, but then what did his servant say? Yeah, he says, let's dig around it, let's fertilize it, let's give it more time, let's do it. And then if it doesn't bear fruit, then, you know, then we're going to have to cut it down. So consider this an opportunity to get more fertilizer, get more settled, get more, so that the expectation from God is that you will bear more fruit, and the fruit will be fruit of life, fruit of righteousness, something that's going to impact the people around you, that as they watch you change, they cannot deny that it's not just an intellectual thing, but something spiritual is going on here because people have studied the Bible. Right? I can point you to New Testament scholars that do not believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. See, we're not just dealing with understanding the text. We're dealing with a spirit-filled understanding of it. And with that, it impacts and changes everything from the way you think to the way you do things.
A lot of these rabbis and stuff, you don't actually believe it.
In New Testament? No.
Well, now, even now, we still not.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, like I said, you can have people that have studied the Bible and then still be atheists. Right? Right? But it is. Okay, so we're going to just do a little bit of a breakdown. I wanted to get into the first line. I'm going to ask you guys just some questions quickly. So, the first one, still written on the board. What is Torah? Notice I use big T. Big T version equals first 5 books, right? And remember, not every Torah is God's Torah, right? Why was it given? This is going to lead us into the when was it given? When and why, they kind of link hand in hand. So who was receiving Torah?
Adam and Eve, in the garden.
You have a verse to back up your theory?
Somewhere in Genesis where they were walking with.
So they were walking with God, but how do you know that they sat there receiving Torah? Okay, so there would be one instruction that we can go back to, right?
After the garden,
Okay,
subdue creation,
go forth and multiply and some other, but where does it talk about eating kosher?
Noah.
All right, so we start, okay, remember we have to go back down to who's the one receiving it now? As in, write this down. Okay, so we're going to go to that Moses illustration to go back to the fullness thereof. God was always talking to creation. Cain and Abel knew how to make offerings. Doesn't say who taught them that. Noah made an offering after he got off the ark. He knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. And so we go on. Abraham did all of the instructions, the mitzvot of the Father. Hello, when did that come in? So there has been a continuous line or evidence thereof of Torah. But when we get to the point of when was it given as a Torah, We're sitting at Sinai, most likely. And Moshe is busy receiving that in that time of those 40 days. All right? So when we look at it, then we can start to look at a different aspect of why it was given. It is not just simply a lamp unto your feet, but also a story of, remember, Bereshit or Genesis would give us the thing of this is the origin of. So this is your history, my boy. Do you understand where you came from? And I find it very interesting. If I wanted to talk to Moses, and I said, Moses, you're sitting on the mountain, where would you start the story? You could have gone maybe, your forefather Abraham, he was in Mesopotamia. I appeared to him. Why go into all the detail about in the beginning there was nothing? And then I was. And this is how I brought off all the order of things. Do you ever stop and consider that? Moses didn't need to know all of that detail. He didn't need to know about the fall from the point of, I'm sitting on Sinai, this is pertinent to me. He probably could have started the story with Abraham. But God, in his wisdom, is going, listen, I want you to understand what I'm doing here, and Sinai is a piece of the puzzle. Just like the covenants are all sitting forward, just like the Moedim are all prophetic in timeline. So he's going to take them back to understand the point of human origin, creation, what went wrong, and how did we get to Pharaoh's understanding in the first place before we had to challenge his ideas. And don't worry, Moses, we got you to Sinai, and now we're at Sinai. No, well, there's still part of the journey that's still to come. You with me? All right? So he wants to give you an understanding of not only the beginning of things, but he also wants to give you instructions to live by. Okay? We spoke about last week how it was studied through the parasha. Now, I want to take a moment and just look at how we define Torah according to the text. Okay? If we take a look and we study out, and we go, okay, when you have a conversation with someone and they're going to say, is Torah good? You're going to get a mixed bag of answers, aren't you? Well, God freed us from the Torah. Don't need that anymore. I've been set free.
Torah nailed to the cross.
Yes. The Torah has been nailed to the cross. Or, no, the Torah is good if you're a Jew. I'm not a Jew, so I'm fine. Right? We're going to get a mixed bag of answers depending on your theology. But I don't want to base it just on plain understanding. I want you to think. We've got three portions of Old Testament. Remember the Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Right? We can go further to something called the Brit Chadashah, which is the New Testament, or the New Covenant. Can I think of any verses that give me an understanding of the way God sees Torah? Fastest fingers first. Google is available for you if you need it.
All scripture is good for instruction.
Okay, when you see, that would be your direct assumption of surely he would be. But maybe he's talking about the law of Christ, not Torah.
But he says all scripture, and they didn't have the Brit Hadashah in those
Yeah.
days. So
Well, you see, when are we going to get, I'm with you 100%, and I agree with you 100%, but I don't want to give there any reason for ambiguity. Right? So what I want from you is, okay, well, a good place to start is maybe the Psalms. Anybody ever read Psalm 119? Open up your Bible.
119.
This is why we never get past the first.
You got to understand. You've got to understand it. I'm going to go with Isaiah. The end is revealed in the beginning. Psalm 119. You'll see that it's broken up into different stanzas, right? Different paragraphs.
Basically, it says from paragraph 1. It already describes it.
So different paragraphs in Psalm 119. Okay? Psalm 119, the longest psalm we have, right, is all about Torah. I want you just to pick a random one. There's from the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet all the way to the last, Aleph to the Tav. That Aleph Tav should mean something a little bit more to you now. And then you can go, if I read the parasha or the portion or the section that is the Aleph or the Bet or the Gimel or the Dalet, whatever it is, you're going to read that little paragraph. If you have it broken up into a CJB or the CJB version or so on, every paragraph will have something about the Torah.
Ask a question then,
Yeah.
because obviously this is coming up quite a lot.
Yeah.
Like outside the meal and all that kind of what exactly is part of the alphabet? Yes.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, I can keep it up order.
Yeah. Okay. What do we have? You guys can start reading at random.
Blessed are the perfect in the way who walk in the Torah of Yehovah. That's Aleph.
Okay. Next one.
Amen. Your word continues forever, Adonai, firmly fixed in heaven. Faithfulness through all generations established the earth and it stands. Yes, I stand today in keeping with your ruling for all things on your servants. If your Torah had not been my delight, I would perish in my distress.
Next one.
Your righteousness is eternal righteousness, and your Torah is truth. Trouble and distress have overtaken me, but your words were delight.
Next one.
The Torah you have spoken means more to me than fortune and abundance.
Hated doubting thoughts. I have nothing to wrong.
The word is a lamp for my foot, a light for my path.
I rejoice in the way of your instruction more than in any kind of wealth. I will meditate on your precepts and keep my eyes on your ways.
Right? When we look at Torah, we look at it from the lens of law. But do you hear that coming out of the psalmist? Go to Psalm 1. See if you see there anything about Torah.
Their delight is in Adonai's Torah, and his Torah they meditate day and night.
Meditate on it day and night. And if you guys take some time, you will find many such verses. Right? Stemming right the way through from Deuteronomy, Psalms is full of it. Okay? All the way through to Paul talking about it in Romans and so on. And you've got to stop and you've got to think, where did we get this negative idea that Torah is a bad thing? Now, sometimes we carry some of that understanding with us. What I want you to see is that, is it biblical? Right? Remember what we said. We said if we add to or take away from, we're dealing with changing God's character. Every mitzvah he gives us is about a reflection upon himself. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not kidnap. Keep Sabbath. And so we go on, and these instructions become pertinent because it helps us better understand him. If I take away the Torah, how am I ever going to understand my God? You with me? People are going to go in, let's take Joe's example, and they're going to go, oh, okay, we're under the law now. Shall we now do we have to stone our children?
If we read words on.
Yeah, but again, I've shared with you guys before, listen to what they're saying. If someone asks you that question, ask them this: was God wrong for instructing it? Don't ask me if I need to do it. I'm going to ask you, was God wrong for instructing it? If you're happy to tell God he was wrong, you and I are not sitting at the same table.
When would something like that have changed? Because God did command us to stone those who blaspheme. And
The challenge we have, and we see that in the New Testament, is that at the stoning of Stephen, or for instance, let's not go with this, I'll hold on to that, is that when you look at the instruction that I would stone a blasphemer, how many times did they try and execute Yeshua? Why didn't they? One, because the time wasn't right. Two, was because legally they weren't allowed to. Okay, now the process in Torah is quite clear. You do something, there has to be 2 or 3 witnesses of that crime. If there's only one, it doesn't count. I would have to take you through to the Sanhedrin. We would have to be interviewed. We would have to go through a process. And if found guilty, the people who witnessed it were the first to throw the stone. Then the entire community behind you would carry on. And I'm not talking about picking up a stone. I'm talking about picking up a stone. According to custom, they would take you to the edge of a cliff, they would bind your hand and feet, they would turn you around and they would push you off so you would land head first, knocking you out. Then they would pick up a stone and then they would walk and then they would drop it. Think about it when the entire community is done.
Not much left of people.
It's not about what's left of you, it's the pile of stones that are left on top of you. What's that going to teach the rest of the people? It's a standing stone. Remember, standing stones are a place where something happened here. Pay attention. Now, as difficult is for us to understand what it must be like to be able to do that, we never think of the repercussions if we don't. So if I allow someone who kidnaps to go and be free, and he gets away with it the first time, what's the likelihood there's going to be a repeat cycle? And what happens to the other people that go, that guy got rich by selling that oak, but we let him get away with it, so what? They're going to have mercy on me as well.
That's why they should bring back the death sentence.
It is a very difficult reality when we're facing with this line that God goes, there is a point, and we're saying, there is a point where God says, if you're going to go that route, you're not going to have anything in the kingdom yet. This is where it is. It stops here. God says, to this point and not much further. Now,
I say it's hard when you think of all this, and I know somewhere, I can't remember the actual incident when he told, I'm not sure, I can't remember, this person to go out and kill the animals, the people, the children, everything, and he didn't kill them all. And then the repercussions afterwards.
was Saul dealing with Agag. Yeah, Saul dealing with it. And remember, it wasn't always, that's a whole teaching unto itself. I'm not going to go down that road. But yes, it's difficult when we don't understand what he's saying. Number one. Number two is that a lot of the times we think that he goes out and kills the horses. It's not. The word is hamstrung the horses. Basically to slide a tendon in so they cannot run because they were used for chariots in war. You can use them now for walking purposes and carrying loads, but you won't be able to use them in battle anymore. So there's processes, again, that we don't understand, and we never take the time. We read it and we go, that sounds tough. Skip. That's not my God. I'm out. But remember, the same loving Father who sent Yeshua to die for you is the same one who gave the instruction. So if he is slow to anger, full of compassion and grace and mercy, as it says in Torah, then why do I treat him otherwise? Because I don't understand him. If I had to pull children that were raised in your house and I brought them in here and I put you out and I used to, at that kiddie age, and say, your parents unfair, what answer do you think I will get? Back in the day, when you have to warm up areas that don't work so nicely, and you say things like, I'm doing this because I love you, and they go, I don't understand that.
I think in the final end, there is not going to be any sin. That's not going to allow any sin in whatsoever in the new.
Yeah, 100%. When it's done.
Yeah, when it's finally done, there is going to be.
But but sin is us problem, not a him problem. Right? We will choose our own way instead of walking in line with God. Now, if I align myself again with His Torah, then what? No sin, no problem. Reconciled. But coming back to the stoning thing, the reason they didn't stone Yeshua off the bat is it was punishable by death according to Rome. Only Rome had the authority to be able to issue a death sentence. If you played that game, they would execute you. Right? So when they stoned Stephen in Acts 7, they took it upon themselves. They were so upset with this guy that they would stone him quickly and then disperse, because they literally, once the governor found out, any centurion found out and said, you were part of that action, there we go, crucifixion pole, off you go.
That just sort of opens up another can of worms. Do we then have to obey our governments?
As far to the
Goes
point,
against Torah.
as far as you can up until the point. When you start getting to the point of denouncing and you can't worship on this day or you can't do that, then we're starting getting to the Hanukkah story, and that becomes a point of, hey, hang on a second, now you're encroaching on how we worship, right? But I find it interesting that even in that time, Yeshua used a government response to make sure that he was crucified at the right time and he wasn't stoned the way the people wanted him to be. So we have to be cautious in that, okay? So when we say we're Torah observant, understand what you're saying. Everything that God says here is true. I might not understand everything the way He wants me to understand it, but I trust Him enough to know that what that instruction means is that He's right all the time. If we say otherwise, God didn't really mean that. Don't worry about that. No, that's not really important. We have to be very careful that you're standing on solid ground. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
just to get back to stoning,
Yes.
and I know that the Torah command says if your son is a drunkard, so it's actually talking about an adult son who's lazy and a drunkard and abusive, etc., etc., doesn't respect his parents. Now, I do know in South Africa that's rife with adult children all over disrespecting their parents. Now, what if one of those parents loses their mind, reads this Torah instruction, stone your child, picks up a stone, stones them, that person will get taken to jail.
Yeah.
But then they could say it's in the Torah.
Yeah. But then by keeping the Torah, they actually nullify Torah.
Yeah.
Because Torah says you are to take him to the Sanhedrin. That doesn't mean that I get to initiate justice without a fair trial, without full understanding, and without community input. Right? So I have to make sure that if I'm going to go, okay, well, if we're going to talk about that, if you're going to do that legally, if you're going to really institute that, you need a court system to be able to interview people. And then I will echo your rabbi's words once more. He who is without sin cast the first stone. The reason he said that was because they were setting him up in a false trial. That woman shouldn't, even though she was guilty, I believe she was. Remember, she was the one caught committing adultery. As they were trying to get into that process, he says, the Torah says this, should we stone her? Did they take her to Sanhedrin? Did Yeshua have the... Yeah, how do you commit adultery by yourself? Where's the guy?
Where was he?
There are so many things that the Sanhedrin would look at them and they would go, you've got to be joking. Don't play games, yeah? You're trying to set this person up. He knew it was a trap. And that's why he could look at them and then he could say that statement, not because she wasn't guilty, but because they were trying to get him executed, not her. So we have to understand, we really have to understand the heart condition, the parameters, so that we do not misrepresent. You with me? All right. So we can sort of look at Torah in the back of our mind as the origin stories of. Okay, so history or origin, say the universe, and that's pretty much chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 4, verse 26. The history of Adam, or mankind, 5, verse 1 to 6, verse 8. The history of Noah, 6, verse 9 to 9, verse 29. Noah's sons, 10, verse 1 to 11, verse 9. The history of Shem goes in more detail, 11, verse 10 to verse 26. The history of Terah, 11, verse 27 to 25, verse 11. Ishmael, 25, verse 12 to verse 18. Isaac, 25, verse 19 to 35, verse 29. Esau, 36, verse 1 to 37, verse 1. And then we get to the history of Yaakov, 37, verse 2 to basically the end of Genesis. Okay? So if we start looking at this breakup, just in Bereshit, we can start to see the histories thereof. With me? Okay. Now if we take your homework that you had, everybody read day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, Shabbat, yes? And I'll give you a minute to copy down. All right. What I would like to do is I would like to peel apart. Remember I said remezes are generally pieces linking back to a scripture. We're going to play a little game where we're going to go forward. Right? So we are not going to get past we will finish chapter 1 hopefully.
It's a lot to write.
Well, feel free to take a photo if you need to.
Yeah, I might be quicker.
Just remember to update your notes. So when you guys are busy taking down notes, which I will encourage you to do, is that when you open up Genesis, you have at least some sort of a commentary or some sort of breakdown or something that you're going to go, when I'm going to read this book, I'm coming at it from this perspective. Okay? I'm just trying to give you the tools so that when you open up the book, you go, okay, right, we're talking to Moses at Sinai, this is what he is, and this is where God starts. And there are going to be some interesting prophetic links. Those are for you, so that you can start to see prophetic foreshadowing and so on. Okay. Right. So now we're going to go a little bit more forward. Let me read just. Will someone read verse 1 and 2 for me?
Right?
Genesis 1 and 2.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was unformed and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the water.
All right.
1 and 2.
Yeah. That was 1 and 2. Okay. So there's an interesting Hebrew word play here. I don't know, maybe because I like to say it. It's tovu vebohu. Tovu vebohu is formless and void. I want you to hear basically everything is in chaos. There's no order to anything. So when God steps in, he says it was formless and void. Basically, nothing was right. Nothing was set in its proper position. Okay? And then he says the Spirit was hovering over the... All right. Now that immediately, if I'm sitting there going, my intro is tovu vebohu, formless and void. And from there he takes me to the Spirit. The Spirit was hovering over the waters. All right. Now, if I was playing a gospel remez, that should sound familiar to you. Where do we see the Spirit hovering over the waters?
Yeshua.
Yeshua was baptized.
Right. Let's go quickly to Matthew 3. No, Matthew 3. Yeah, she was in it baptizing. That was the shortest thing ever. I'm going to read from verse 13. So before that, John is saying, repent, the kingdom is at hand, and so on. And he says, then Yeshua came from the Galilee to the Jordan to be immersed by Yochanan, but Yochanan tried to stop him. You are coming to me, I ought to be immersed by you. However, Yeshua answered him, let it be this way for now, because we should do everything righteousness requires. When Yochanan led him, as soon as Yeshua had been immersed, he came up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God coming down upon him like a dove. And a voice from heaven said, this is my Son whom I love, I am well pleased with him. Your translation might say something different there. Okay? Now, from the beginning of his public ministry, he stops and he goes, Spirit hovering over the waters, Spirit hovering over the waters, where's your remez? What is it about Tovu Vebohu that tells you about the time Yeshua was entering into his public ministry?
Formless and void.
Everything was out of order. He's coming in. These guys had no structure. Although they had Torah, they were completely Tovu Vebohu. Starts to set up something very interesting spiritually speaking. See, when God stepped into creation, he brought order. When Yeshua stepped into ministry, he goes, this is where we're getting it wrong. You need to separate that. You need to cut that out. Don't go play that game. Don't eat that fruit. I thought you were supposed to produce after like kind, and so we go on. And he stops it at that moment. It was not just a picture for John. You'll see that in the other Gospels. It says that was a sign for him. But he's taking us again back to Genesis. Now we miss that sometimes. Right? You could probably also make this link with Noah. The first bird he sent out was? No. A raven. Right? And the raven went around, and didn't find any place, and then eventually came back. What person is linked to a raven in the text? Elijah. A raven comes and feeds Elijah when he was resting at the streams.
But aren't they also scavengers? So they pick up
Yeah.
meat?
Well, in this case, we're hoping that he wasn't feeding Elijah rotting meat. Right? But they do.
Like they
Yes.
sort of like vultures and
They generally would. They will eat whatever's around. Okay? But I think in the plain sense, there's a difference slightly. The raven will fly a little bit further and up and about. Okay? When I send out a dove, where do we generally find doves? Trees and on the floor. Okay? So they're looking to go scratch around on the floor, right? The raven will probably go look and pop off at a high tree. And if he comes back, and then I know he doesn't find any place to rest, he didn't find a high tree to hang around, so the water's still pretty high. Okay? From a remez point of view, or a link towards the point, you see the raven and Elijah are linked together in the story. Now, when he sends out a dove, the dove and Yeshua are linked together. Isn't it funny that, again, we have John, who's, again, in the power of Eliyahu, of Elijah, going out before Yeshua. So sending out the birds is a prophetic foreshadow of John and Yeshua, if you're following me. Okay? If you miss me on that, don't worry. We come back to Yeshua. We see the dove coming in over, and he's settling upon him. And God gives him his statement. Okay, now the CJB renders it up because he breaks up the Hebrew into 3 statements. Okay, but you can have a look at the Mount of Transfiguration. He says it as well. On the Mount of Transfiguration, if you go to Matthew 17, verse 5, look at the description God says. Matthew 17, verse 5. So God pictures up and he gives what we say in Hebrew is a bat call, a voice from heaven. And he goes, "This is my son." You know, in the back of your mind, I want you to just go, God makes a public declaration about who this guy is. And in Matthew 4, you got Satan asking if you are. If you're really the... Isn't it funny how God will tell you exactly who you are, and the first thing that Satan will do is to try and attack your identity because you're the one who fails to believe that you're actually what God said you are. Am I good enough? Am I saved? Am I really a believer? Am I really His? You fill in the gap. Satan will call you by your sin to make sure that you doubt every single one of those statements. The question is, will you believe God or will you believe Him? Okay, number one. Number two, he breaks it up into these three things. Again, at the Transfiguration, the same sort of things come up. Did that sting a little? Why does he break it up into those three statements? Because he can. I don't know, Vince, I've never thought about it until you pointed it out.
My son.
This is my son. Remember, this is the word. This is my son. Someone go to Psalm 2 and read it for me quickly.
The whole song.
The whole psalm, yeah. It's not very long.
Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh, and the Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath, and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on his holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and you shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way. When his wrath is kindled but a little, blessed are all those who put their trust in him.
Now, that's a big statement coming from one little remez, don't you think? If they had picked up, this is my son, I need to sit here being very careful how I treat him, because this is the one that God said, I've appointed my king upon this mount. Nations, beware. You see, Yeshua uses, God uses something very interesting here. He remezes from three parts. Whom I love, Isaiah 42. From verse 1, start reading and see when you see anything that says, this is someone whom I love.
42, verse 1. See my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, my being has delighted in. I have put my spirit upon him. He brings forth right ruling to the nations.
You see it? Your translations have something slightly different.
He will bring justice to the nations.
This is the one whom I love, whom I'm chosen, right? You see that in your text. Okay? This is the guy. He's going to bring justice. And I would encourage you to go and read out the entire chapter, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to be able to. Okay? Yeah, 42. All right? Listen to him. Deuteronomy 18. Verse 15.
And I will raise up for you a prophet like me from among yourselves, from your own kinsmen. You are to pay attention to him.
Yeah, you have to listen to him. Pay attention to him. This is the guy, the prophet like Moses. Right? So what do we have? We have something from Torah, we have something from the prophets, and we have something from the writings. You'll see it in a few different places. And once you start to go, Yeshua, or God makes a statement of three things, and he says, this is the guy I told you about. From Moses' lips to the prophets to the writings. The entire Old Testament, in a sense. The Tanakh is all pointed to him. All broken up simply by doing three remezes, and he goes, that's the guy. Yeah.
So what is the in the case?
Never in. You may write it out. Ketuvim. Right? Torah, first 5 books. Nevi'im is the prophets, majors and minors. Ketuvim, writings. So Ketuvim, basically, if you look in a Hebrew or you say if you buy a Tanakh, the way the Old Testament is broken up is into those 3 sections. Okay, different to the way we break up a normal Christian Bible. It's a bit all over the place. So he is reaffirming that this again, the guy I told you about throughout the word, this is him. All caught with the remez about a dove. Verse 2. How's your brains? All right. Let's go.
Actually, 3 in 1.
3 statements here. Okay? All right. Now we're going to go day 1. What happened on day 1? You guys all you did your homework, yes?
Separated light from dark.
Okay? Light and dark. Day 2?
Separated water from the water.
All right. Heavens above, sky and the sea. Day 3? Yeah, land and veggies. Yay for veggies. 4? Sun, moon, and stars. For what purpose? All right. Rule, but also signs for the Moedim. When it talks about the seasons of the Moed, the appointed times. Remember, we make a direct link from that to Leviticus 23. Now, since there is a little bit of confusion, and I'm not going to go completely into the calendar debacle that we have, I'm going to give you 2 Psalms again. Go to Psalm 81, verse 3. Psalm 81, verse 3 tells us what?
They start the music, beat the drums, play the sweet lyra and the lute.
Carry on.
Sound the shofar at Rosh Chodesh at the full moon for the pilgrim feast, because this is a law for Israel.
Right. At the full moon. There are people out there that believe we deal with a solar calendar, not a lunar one. Why is he concerned about whether it's full moon and not in the middle of the solar anything there? He doesn't reference this at all. Psalm 104 verse 19, or thereabouts.
He made the moon for appointed times, sun knows it's going down.
He made the moon for what? Moedim. Mark the seasons, the same word he uses for the festivals, the Moedim. He made the moon, not the sun, not the stars, even though there's an overlapping reality. Okay? He says he made the moon. If people are going to come in and they're going to tell you, listen, you have to follow the calendar of Sadok, you have to follow Enoch's calendar, it is direct contradiction to two scriptures. These are only two. I have more. Directly contradicting the text. If I can say you can't trust the text because the corrupt priesthood invented this because they were actually Greeks and they were actually Romans and because they were this and all the rest of it, and they try and take it back to Qumran and the Essenes. I love you madly. I've been there many times. I know lots about the Essenes. I'm not going to go into their crazy. Guys, they didn't get it all right. You want to have that conversation with me? You're welcome to any time. You don't believe me? Come with me. I'll show you. It's going to take us a little airplane ride and some fun, but hey, we'll get there. You'll see some sights along the way. But I can take you to a museum that will talk about the life of the Essenes, and you will see from their own writings that these guys did not get it correct all the time. They were devout, absolutely, just like the Pharisees were devout, just like the Zealots were devout, and just like the Sadducees were devout in their own understanding. If you need to use extra biblical texts that contradict your text and you take their word over your Bible, I'm questioning whether or not you're following the text at all. Clear? Okay.
Why did he not call the separation of the waters on the second day good?
We're going to get to that. Nicely spotted. Nicely spotted. Okay? There are 5 sea creatures and birds. Flying creatures if you must. There is 6. Land animals and man.
I'd like to keep that right at the beginning.
Yep.
Before day one, when Jesus, when God said, this was void and empty.
Yes.
When did he create the earth? Or was the earth always there?
It says that there was nothing, but it was formless. Now, what's interesting there is the description of it is it says basically there's like water. Now, inside of that, he kind of goes, okay, I'm going to create separations. They're all. Yeah.
Verse 1 says,
Read it.
in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So there wasn't.
And then he tells you what he created. Okay? But when he came there, well, let me not say came there. As he spoke, these things needed to be brought into order. So the water and everything was there. So what seems to happen is he separated the waters. He allowed the land to come into position. From there, he was able then to separate the heavens and keep the borders of the oceans and everything along that point. So he had to create this, give it shape and form so that there could be life. Okay, so the whole point of it is, again, not how he brought forth the hydrogen molecules and the oxygen molecules to create water and all the rest of it. He's not going into any details here. He's just going, listen, it was a big mess when I got there. Everything here needed to be put into order. Now, in your mind, there's a double application to that. There is a physical chaos and then there's a spiritual chaos, right? Without God, our lives are nothing but chaos. So when he comes in and he starts to create separation, did you guys start to notice that when he starts going, right, you become a believer, now what? What's the first thing he starts to separate from you?
Sin.
Yeah, your obvious sin, your old self. He tries to create this distinction between who you were and who you need to be. You come into Torah, is there further separation? Have you noticed that within the separation there were other people that were probably being separated further and further away from you that you didn't even realize was going on? And now all of a sudden the world that you're in right now is not the world you were in 5 years ago. And you're looking up and you're going, how did I get here? Slowly but surely, God has been bringing out of your chaos, putting in order and place. Now, when we go against him, if you think again of Noah's flood, I see Noah's flood as a reverse creation. He goes, these are the boundaries of which the water will not again pass. And God goes, I look at my creation and I get sad, there's no point to it. I'm lifting up the borders. What's the point of creation in the first place? I created you to have a relationship with me and you, there's nothing good here. Waters from the top come down. Waters from below come up. Waters from the seas and the waters around collapse. And he takes us back to that moment of tohu vebohu. Except there's a little ark.
So day 2 is an analogy of Noah's house.
Day 2, there's many different ideas. What Anne is pointing to is that you'll see it'll say, he did this and it was good. He did this and it was good. But on day 2, he never says it's good. So, what is it about the sky and the sea that he goes, nah?
Because I think he knew that the days of Noah would come and there would be a flood and the waters would come crashing down from the top and the deep from the bottom, the fountains from the bottom, and everything would just be chaos again.
It's very, very possible. Thank you, Manav. My timekeeper. We've got 5 more minutes, guys. You will survive.
Sorry, when it goes day 1, day 2, and so on, to Elohim, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. So, I mean, it's always a question mark. Was one day 1,000 years?
Right. Very, very good question. Right? When he says a day to him is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day, it's an expression. Okay? Joe and I were having a discussion. Yeah. If we were to say the day of the Lord, when is the day of the Lord? When he comes back?
It's going to be a dark day of wrath.
You see, Peter used the day of the Lord scriptures in Joel 2 to point to the crucifixion. Or was that the day of the Lord? According to Peter's analogy, there was a part of it that was the day of the Lord, right? When the sun grows dark. You see, the day of the Lord is not specifically a 24-hour period, but the day of the Lord is a time period. But what the Genesis creation story becomes a little bit more specific, because he defines day. He goes, it was evening, then it was morning, and then it was evening, and that was a day. So then you've got evening, morning cycles that he instituted, where can I look around and see exactly what that looks like? And it's been consistent throughout all history. It's like that 24-hour period. Okay? So we can go, well, it might be, it might not be. I think the way he phrases it is quite evident that he's talking about day, morning, night. And he instituted that cycle. So if he says, listen, before the sun was, there was light. What happened there? Remember, day 4 sun. Where did the light come from? Exactly. It's him in fullness. Now, if we're going to go, okay, well, that's the picture, because in Revelations it said there's going to be no sun. Why don't we need it? Why? Because him, the origin of all light, which is life, is going to be sitting on the throne. You won't need that to shine forth. It becomes a picture of a cosmic power play that he's saying, it's me, guys.
Does that also, okay, so
Gears are turning.
to get this into
No worries.
Okay, so because Yeshua is our light, right? Does that also mean that even before man was created, the light, God's light, the spiritual light, also came in with that into the world?
There's it's very aspects. So with an absence of God, and we can take this back down to the plagues. This picture will come back a bit later. When he blocked out the sun for how many days? Right? And it says it was so heavy that they couldn't get out of bed. He was painting a spiritual picture of saying, listen, this is the absence of life without me. It was a spiritual challenge. You're saying that that's God, but this is what your God looks like when I turn it off. Click. Nothing. Put yourself back, and I will hardly ever do this, but put yourself back into your BC mindset before Christ. And I want you to think of those nights when you sat awake and you were empty and you were alone. Even though there was maybe lights around you, maybe there were people around you, but there was something that was so empty. I'm going to go with tohu vebohu, that you have nothing. And yet you look around, you have things. And you're like, Father, there must be more. Or God, you're crying out to this deity. You have no idea. And you're saying there has to be something else. Everything else before that was distraction. Distraction leads to destruction. The reality here you get is saying, okay, when God steps in, all of a sudden now we have this relationship. Remember that bet that he starts off with his entire story was a numerical value of 2. Isn't it interesting? Light, dark, sky, sea, that thing. It's not just that. He's going to go, I'm going to do this 2 things at a time. And eventually we're going to see where the fall happens. There's going to be this interesting split. Tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, but I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's pause for a second. Day 6. Go to day 6 and tell me how he created man. Okay, he takes the dust of the earth, that which was separated before, separated the waters to be able to get it, right? Takes the dust and he breathes life into it. But before that, he says, let's make man in our image and there's an interesting Hebrew wordplay here. We're probably going to have to take a break. How long do your breaks want to be? Salem, which is image, and Thal, which means shadow. I find it interesting that the modern Hebrew uses this term, Tselem, for what? A photocopy. So when he says, I want you to be made in my image, and they go, just look in the mirror and you'll understand exactly who you are. You're a copy of the original. Right? Tzal, yeah. Yeah, in Hebrew there's a letter called a tzadi, which is a T and an S together, like a tzaddik.
T-S-A-L.
Yeah. Now, if we are to just for a second go, he takes dust and he goes, where everything else was spoken. He creates us in a slightly different way. He takes the Ruach and he breathes that life into us, right? Now look at that same image. When we get recreated again, it's that same Holy Spirit that comes upon us again, right? So do the math. If he could take sand and go, and out comes the most complicated being known to man. And he takes that most complicated being and he goes, a second time? For you who are sitting in this room, tell me what you are. You are not a glorified mud ball anymore. You have been freshly breathed upon to become something so much more complicated, spiritually speaking, than just this complicated group of atoms and DNA and synapses and brain function and everything else. To the point where he looks at you and he goes, this needs more life, and he breathes on you a second time?
The double portion of Ruach.
You are that recreated. The same way he created you there in the beginning, he's going, you broke this one, I'm going to breathe on you again, and you're going to become something so much more than you understood there.
So the first time was breathed into physical life, and the second time spiritual life.
It's both. Because he walked with God.
We were sort of spiritually dead before we came to.
No, we only became spiritually dead after the fall.
Yeah.
But then we still had a relationship with God, even without the Ruach HaKodesh. Abraham doesn't say he was filled with the Holy Spirit to have a relationship, right?
Yeah.
Right? But he was considered righteous because of his faith. So the Ruach HaKodesh in this section is looking at you from a completely different, distinct idea. You are not of the world. You are in, but you belong to me. When he says you are kadosh, holy, set apart for me, as much as it's beautiful, the marriage idea is there. But he's saying, listen, I have breathed into you. Do you not understand? You were not made for here. You were made for me. When you look in the mirror, do you see that? Or do you just dust to dust? Not anymore. From dust to throne, maybe. Don't treat yourself as anything less. You with me? All right. I've got one more thing I want to do. So if you guys will bear with me, if I cut your break maybe by about 10 minutes so we can do the sit thing and finish chapter 1. You guys okay with that? All right. Let's take a break, grab some coffee and cookies, and then we'll come back.
Look in the mirror, I just see deterioration.
All right. So day 6. When we start looking at the Tselem and the Tzal, what does it mean to be made into the image or the copy or the shadow of God? And remember we spoke about it, he says, let us make man in our, so we're speaking about again the fullness of Elohim. And what does it mean when we get to the fullness of that? It's a really weird... If you could only see what I see right now. People on the recording are going to be like, okay, we're going to have to make this a thumbnail. When a Great Dane sits on Kevin's lap. Okay. So we have a couple of aspects that we can take this from, okay? So we can say, all right, to be made in the image of God, one aspect of that might be that he's given you free will. All right? Do you remember a lion doesn't have a choice if he wakes up one day, he wants to do something else. That's his understanding, that's how his programming is, and that's how it is. All right? For humanity, we have this thing of, okay, I can make this choice, I can do that, I can choose to ignore God, or I can choose to worship him. I can choose to determine what he is according to my own parameters and make that something. We could go, and it's something that we didn't mention yet, is that you see that everything will produce after its own kind, correct? So we get in itself within Torah a Torah, the law of like kind. So as we are created in God's image, we are going to produce in the same, and we can go into that being in your DNA coding, you are going to produce that which is made in the image of God. All right? Another aspect is that you might have God's characteristics built in you. You have the ability to choose righteousness, good, and so on. You have the ability to become, I will point at a phrase as, like your father's son or your father's daughter. Right? If you act like him, for the most part, that's not going to say you're going to do it perfectly. Salvation is still a must. But if we choose it as choosing life, we could choose to walk with him and understand that because we are made in his image and that character, we understand that we have been chosen, we have been created for a relationship. Okay? Another aspect of that is that you were made for that relationship, not just for a time, but for eternity. Okay, he didn't create for you to be destroyed. We chose that. We got it wrong. We sinned, we went against the instruction, and the wages of sin is death. That's something we chose. But ultimately, we were supposed to be able to walk with him, be in relationship with him forever. And that was supposed to be, this is us doing it. Right? We need to perhaps understand this when he created Adam, or mankind, or humankind in a sense, that this is a community thing, not just an individualistic thing. So as much as I can identify with myself and my relationship with God, it's one brick in a temple. It's one digit in the body. Okay? It's us walking together in the fullness of that relationship that also makes it work. The last one I want to mention here is that in the fullness of Elohim, remember our illustration from last week, Yad, Yadayim, Yadim. So it's three or more. Okay, Paul does something interesting in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23. Go there quickly. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23.
23.
5:23, yeah. Yeah, 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23. What does he tell us there? Yeah, whoever's got it.
And the animal of peace himself set you completely apart in your entire spirit and being and body. Be preserved blameless at the coming of our Master Yeshua Messiah.
So the fullness of Elohim preserves you in what? Right? And it talks about you being made up of how many parts? 3 parts.
Spirit, being, and body.
Right. Okay.
Spirit,
Yeah.
soul, and body.
Spirit, soul, and body. Now, there's 2 illustrations that can make your brain tick over on this. So I'm just going to, let's open this up, shall we? Unpack it a little bit. If I look at spirit, soul, and body, and I understand that, hang on a second, what else was made up in 3 parts? I can look at the tabernacle, correct? All right. If the tabernacle was also made of 3 parts, I have an outer court, I have a holy place, and I have a holy of holies. Holy of holies, holy place, and outer court. If I were to do a midrash or a study on this, I could possibly say, hang on a second, the outer court seems to be anything that is external, sounds very much like the body. Right? So if then, where does God communicate with me? My spirit, when he resides in the Holy of Holies. So that would mean our soul would link very much with the holy place. Now, there are many different illustrations that we can go down this road with. If I start to take a look at my soul, basically in Scripture, it kind of gets broken up into my mind, my will, and my emotion. Mind, will, emotion. How many pieces of furnishings are in the holy place? 3 pieces. Now we're going to start to go, okay, well, hang on a second. Which one is my mind, which one is my will, and which one's my emotions? We have a menorah, we have a table of showbread, and we have an altar of incense. Right? So in the tabernacle itself, he starts to give us a different picture. And he says, just as this is, I want you to see yourself as. Now, if I were to parallel that thinking with perhaps the deity and the fullness of Elohim, Father, Son. Now, if you start to think about it from that point of view, outer court. Which one of those would fit that reality? Well, as I said, if I say to you, what came in the flesh? Yeshua. All right, so if Yeshua had interaction with everything external, we could perhaps put him there. Wasn't he the one who sacrificed himself on the altar? I mean, yes, you're going to see Yeshua throughout the tabernacle. All I'm doing is maybe just shifting an analogy here to maybe let's open this up and maybe we could see something from a slightly different angle. So if I start to look at this and I start to go, okay, well, being made in the image of God is, hang on a second, to be made in the very presence of God, by God, through God, for God, to be in right relationship with God. And then when Paul says, do you not realize that you are the temple? Ta-da! Hang on a minute. Now we start to understand that in a very different picture. Okay, so these facets of being linked in and saying the fullness of who I am is created not only in his shadow, in his presence, in his perfect copy, but also in relationship, for eternity. Through a breath. When you live your life, are we, at the back of our mind, keeping that reality open? In relationship, for relationship. When I look in that mirror, am I seeing the fact that I am created in his image, in the fullness of Elohim? That it was the very Ruach HaKodesh who knitted me together in my mother's womb, so that I could walk in a world that at many times says, I don't need saving. But a light in the dark. Everything is tohu vebohu. But in the midst of that, there's order. There's divine light. There's my son and my daughter, placed here to produce after like kind, so that others may understand their true identity or their roots of their origins. You with me? It's something I'm going to leave you to chew on for the next week. Okay? Homework for next week. I thought this was fellowship, not Bible school. I want you to look up what the scriptures say about Shabbat. While we're there, I'm gonna, because we have a Jewish understanding, which is a lot of it according to, again, Mishnaic understanding. We have a lot of people who kind of, as I said, we don't fully study out the text to find out exactly what is expected of us on Shabbat. I want you to find out what it says. What are the actual verses that say, do this, don't do this, and how does that all fit in the back of your mind? How did my rabbi do it? I'm going to unpack those verses, and then we're going to hopefully come to a fullness. From there, we're going to play a game called Patterns of Seven. Patterns of Seven. Okay, so if we have 7 days and we have 7 feasts, What is God trying to tell us? How do we overlap? If I have 7 feasts and I have 7 species of fruit or food that was given to them, a list of 7, pomegranates, olive, figs, wheat, barley, so on. Why did God give me a list of 7? And in the midst of that, maybe we can overlap a couple of these and just start to get you to look at maybe a further pattern going on.
This,
Hmm.
we are actually doing Genesis 1. How do you expect? Really, this is so confusing. Because you're in Genesis 1, now we're doing Shabbat.
Yeah.
Then it's
Is Shabbat in Genesis 1? Is it there?
I don't know.
If you did your homework, you would see on the 7th day. Yeah. So and it says, it literally says there on the Shabbat. What did God do on the Sabbath?
Verse 2, or what verse now that we're going to study?
We've passed verse 2. We've moved on. We're doing quite well. We're near the end of the first chapter. Like I said to you, is that there's a lot of things that we have the framework of, right? We normally look at it from a gospel point of view or a Brit Chadashah point of view, and we go, oh, okay, this is it. Now, let's give you an example. You say you're a disciple of Christ. I pray it's so. Yeshua was in a synagogue on Shabbat. Where are you? In a garage. Bad disciple. Right? So now the process is like this. If I'm going to be a full disciple, then how do I understand it the way he understood it? Now, if I was, again, part of this New Testament reality, if I come up to Yeshua and I say, Shabbat, teach me, where do you think he's going to start?
The beginning.
I'm doing it the other way around. Saying, this is the story. Bereshit bara Elohim. Okay, Father, well, what is it about Shabbat that you need me to know going forward? So that I can look at that picture.
This is Hebrew to English now. Backward.
These are remezes that Yeshua hoped you understood when he did something on Sabbath. There are so many people out there with the understanding that he broke Shabbat. Never, ever, ever saying, again, Torah observant people going, oh yeah, on Shabbat we can do this, this, and this, and this. But we've never studied the text. I don't want you to say, Vince, what am I allowed to do on Sabbath? I'm going to go, here's the Bible. You tell me, what did you find? From then parallel that which is written down in the text with, this is Yeshua. What did he do on that day? How did he keep it? And is there a further illustration of what Sabbath's supposed to be? But for now, I'm looking at what are the instructions for me to keep? Okay? Shabbat is there. Shabbat is there. Is it future as well? If I understand the basic principle here, yes, well, there we go. Okay, you already started your homework. Look at you go. Okay, any questions? Let's make sure they're heated. No pressure. All right. Okay, you're all good there. All right. Tune in next week for more.